Good morning and welcome to the third and final customized technical training being offered by VEIC during the month of May. Once again, I'm really delighted to see that so many people have registered for today's conversation. And for those that are participating for the first time, and just as a brief reminder for others who have participated in previous trainings, my name is Zoe Dawson and I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation on how to unlock and maximize energy savings in your buildings by focusing on HVAC opportunities. I'm a senior consultant at VEIC, and I support the energy management practice area that's helped to develop these technical overviews directly for your benefit. I'm joined remotely by one of our leading commercial, industrial, and institutional engineering experts, Rachel Mescalino, who I'm going to be introducing to you shortly. But before we dive in, just want to run through a few quick housekeeping items to help benefit everyone's webinar experience today. As with previous webinars, these trainings are being recorded, and both the slide deck and the recordings for all three presentations delivered will be posted to VEIC's YouTube channel and to our reports page on our website. We'll send an email to all registered participants early next week with links to these. And again, a reminder, while these trainings may contain technical content, they don't align with any specific CEU offering. Reducing feedback, we will be making sure that all participants are going to be muted throughout the presentation to ensure clarity of conversation, but we do encourage questions, so please use the question box in the GoToWebinar sidebar on your screen and submit those at any time. We're really going to try and endeavor to leave around 5 to 10 minutes at the end of today's presentation to review all of those questions that have been posed by you and to give time for Rachel to respond to those directly. If we do run out of time, though, please feel free to contact us. Contact information is provided at the end on the final slide. As with our previous trainings, we do want to hear your feedback. We have an embedded survey link specific to this training that will be circulated to participants again in an email after this meeting. It takes just a moment for you to fill out, but it really provides us with invaluable advice as we look to continue to improve the delivery of our trainings to you, and really more importantly, provide information that can help us all strengthen our teams and to really think about how we better support and engage our customers and more effectively communicate on the value proposition of efficiency. So again, it's really great to see lots of people here. I see many of you are joining just now, and on the attendee list, it looks like we have people from across the country. So thanks for all of those of you who are perhaps sitting here listening in with your first round of tea or coffee. For those who don't know much about VEIC, we're a nonprofit mission-driven organization with experts in efficiency, building and transportation electrification. And we have a keen focus on developing new approaches for a clean and flexible grid. As the map here on the left-hand side illustrates, we work across the US, but we have a global vision to help generate the energy solutions that the world needs today. We've been lucky to work with many of you on the line today and to continue to work with you, individuals that represent utilities, energy and environmental offices, businesses, transit agencies, and foundations and nonprofits from across the country. We really are grateful for your partnership. At VEIC, our goal has always been to work with our clients, though, to help deliver impact for the people that really need it the most. One of the ways that we seek to do this is by sharing our insights and our lessons learned and some of the best practices that we've picked up through trainings such as this, and thinking through how we can have an active and an open dialogue on how to best engage target markets and provide value again to our end-use customers. And for the third week running, we're really excited to be providing you with another example of how we approach this for the commercial market, again, delivered by one of our in-house experts. So who are you going to be hearing from today? Rachel Mescalino may be known to some of you, but if you're located in the Northeast, she's probably far more likely to be familiar to many of your customers, especially if they're hospitals or industrial facilities. And most specifically, she's familiar with their individual building energy management and HVAC systems. At VEIC, she leads our technical group of engineers that focus on HVAC solutions. But outside of her incredible experience and field and technical knowledge, one of Rachel's key qualities is really her ability to engage customers in a meaningful way and to help translate and make visible to them the energy saving opportunities that efficiency can bring. Being able to tell a compelling story is one of Rachel's key qualities. And perhaps the only other thing that she may be as or more passionate about is her bees, to which she also applies the same rigorous consideration of HVAC strategies, thinking about how to keep those humidity set points perfect and the hive happy and humming during Vermont's cold winters. So what's Rachel going to be talking about today? She's going to be sharing with you some comprehensive tips on how to make a good first impression and better identify efficiency improvements and opportunities for your customers by understanding what their building systems actually really need. She's going to be looking to offer you valuable tips of how to think about personalizing and really honing your customer engagement approach, and finally provide some examples of relatively simple electric and thermal measures that you should always be aware of, alongside a brief discussion of ventilation strategies, including some consideration and conversation around ASHRAE's new recommendations due to COVID-19. Our hope with today's presentation, as with our previous trainings, is really to provide you with some actionable insight on ways that you can think about a more innovative and perhaps more comprehensive approaches to evaluating opportunities for your customers and their buildings' energy uses, and ways that you might think to adjust your programs that better serve the markets that you serve in the immediate future. I'm going to bring it back to today's conversation and hand things over to Rachel, because she is joining us remotely, and to ensure that we have consistency with everybody's visibility of the slides, I'm going to be forwarding the deck for Rachel. So just a quick note to all that Rachel will be asking for my assistance in that manner. So Rachel, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Zoe, and thank you everyone for joining today for this discussion. I'm going to start high level. I like to frame the discussion of HVAC energy use starting pretty high up. I think it's valuable to understand that distribution of the end use that the projects and the programs are going to be focusing on. And I think it's probably a pretty familiar rule of thumb to this group that HVAC accounts for about 44% of a building's energy use. And within this 44%, we are including the heating, the reheat, the cooling, the ventilation, and all of that associated fan and pump energy. And the distribution of those percentages will vary slightly on that breakdown based on climate zone, but this is a pretty valuable metric to keep in the back of your mind. These charts from CBEX data, they do represent total energy, so we're looking at the thermal and the electrical components here. And if we pull that data out of CBEX to look at electrical only, HVAC is still that largest end use. A lot of people focus their attention on lighting, but on the electrical side, HVAC is about 33% of the electrical use, where lighting is down around probably lower than 20 at this point. I think 15 to 20 is what we're looking at as those advances in LEDs have taken hold. HVAC, it's a significant piece of the energy pie. I also think it's the most invisible to building owners, which is why sometimes it gets overlooked. It's complicated for program designers, and that rarely are two building systems exactly the same. So it's hard to characterize a program around HVAC savings and measures. There's a lot of interactive effects. There are multiple mechanical components that all work together to make up that 44%. And it's not always easy for customers to distill the exact impacts of those components on their overall system. So I think my role and all of our roles in being part of the energy solution is to really translate these complexities into actionable measures that can help bring visibility in a relevant way. And I think we can do that with thoughtful program designs and really help bridge that communication gap for building facilities personnel on what they can focus on to make an impact. Next slide, please. So this is, as we start to think about the working with different market sectors or specific customers, if we take that level of information down just one notch and look at that breakdown of HVAC energy use by market, there's a large portion, there's a large distribution here, but certainly for a grocery store on one end of the spectrum versus education, we're going to see that grocery clearly is going to have refrigeration that's going to outweigh the HVAC load. But again, these percentages are important to keep in the back of your mind as we start to characterize the projects and the customers that we're going to engage with. And this is going to be one of those key elements of those small amounts of information that can really start to quantify the potential efficiency impacts. I use this as a grounding point in my analysis and my conversations to really manage expectations for myself and the customers before I even step into a building of what I'm going to be seeing and at what level of savings we're going to be able to start conversations around with our customers. Next slide. So you'll hear me talk a lot about characterizing your customer. This lends to what Zoe talked about in terms of telling the story. And there are opportunities where you may be engaging with customers that you already have a long-standing relationship with. But the next phase of efficiency that we see is really making those inroads to market transformation with new program design and offerings that reach the customers that have not been previously included in efforts and initiatives. And we want to make a good first impression. There are times when I'm working with a customer that I've only had maybe one brief 20-minute phone conversation with prior to being on site with them. And it's really, this is an example of some of the work that we've done and fine-tuned to find that balance between gathering information on the significant information that we're going to need to offer a relevant and valuable investigation into their buildings without peppering them with a checklist of questions. And I've found over the years that some of the information that we need to collect on the engineering side, it's almost prohibits progressive movement through efficiency measures for some of our customers. So I'm going to focus a lot on the art of the conversation here and not as much on the technical side. But some of the really valuable information that I've found is easy to collect is identifying that primary operation and building use. 2 years worth of electrical and thermal data can be a huge jumping off point, and that load profile of how they're using that energy. High level understanding of the equipment that they're using. So they have central steam, central hydronic, they have central chillers. Is it more unitary equipment? Just again, really high level characterization of the equipment that might be using this 44% of their building's energy. And the other piece that I find really valuable to try and get ahead of time is any historical project in EEU engagement. And this really helps me understand where to start the conversation with a subset of customers in one market or one specific customer. So in addition to understanding their completed projects, I always like to ask about any previous reports or audits that have been completed. And I'd say about 50% of the time, I have customers that easily just forward me a report that has been completed. And within that report, there are efficiency measures that were identified and were not completed. And so this is another piece that has really informed our engagement methods that tells me that if we're trying to move the needle on efficiency improvements that are implemented, we need to change that engagement method, and we need to avoid replicating what's previously been presented to our customers and proven to be irrelevant to them. Because if it was relevant, then I'm assuming they would have moved on it and completed some of those measures and not just put that report on the shelf without action. Next slide, Zoe. So that little bit goes a long way. A 2 or 3 year data dump from a utility has been really easy to obtain historically for my customers. And it takes little or no effort for the customer. Sometimes it's just getting their permission for the utility to release it to me. If you're listening and more on the program perspective side, you probably already have access to monthly or even 15-minute interval data. And this is not data that I'm looking to mine for anomalies that can occur over small periods of time. This is really, I'm looking to illustrate overarching load shapes of how energy is used to help inform some of the more succinct questions that I really want to hit early on with some of my customers or a target market. On the program side, looking at information like this, year over year, monthly data, it can be valuable to compare load shapes for the same market end use. So if we were able to, I work with a lot of hospitals, so pulling this load shape for maybe 10 or 15 hospitals in a specific region and looking for those similarities or outliers for what those load shapes of energy use can be very valuable. And even just from this little bit of data, as a starting point, I'm able to see that for this customer specifically, they have a distinct summer AC load. So that's telling me they probably have a central or unitary cooling equipment. It's probably not a water source heat pump system. They have a very high base load of natural gas use in addition to responding to some winter heating demands. So that's going to inform some of the questions that I can ask my customer just by having this data. Also, it tells me their annual average electrical and thermal use, and that's going to be relevant as I'm looking at those percentages of reduction for some of the measures that I'll talk about in the next slide here. And so the other valuable part, 1 year, 2 year, that's easy to get. If you have 3 or more years of data that you can access for your customers or for a specific market, you're going to be able to tell if there's a trend up or a trend down. Again, this is not weather normalized. This is not AMI data mining. This is just high level information to really fine tune and make your conversations relevant going forward. Next slide. Great. So characterize your customer. So there's value, there's proven value in personalizing your customer engagements. And these are some of the lessons that I've learned that have led to actual implementation of the efficiency measures that we can suggest. So technical aptitude is always the foundation, and the assumption is that knowledge and aptitude is there. But the goal is about the measures that are implemented and not simply identified. And this is where that personalization comes into play. There's a lot of HVAC mechanical engineers out there across the country, and there are still inefficient buildings. So that tells me there's a gap. The goal is to focus on presenting the measures and opportunities in a way that motivates action. And I think the most critical lesson learned that I see play out every week in my work is this last bullet. Money is cheaper than time. I have so many customers that know what they should do, and they actually have some budget available to do it. It's the time resource that's the barrier. And I see this most prominently in healthcare and higher education. And this is one of the barriers that I think as efficiency utilities and engaging with our customers, I think there is space here for us to fill this gap and break this barrier down to see more of the good work implemented that we know is a possibility for our customers. Next slide. So how do we take that characterization and turn that into action? I always start by focusing on optimizing the equipment that already exists in the facility. And here I've laid out some of the common measures that we see that customers actually move forward with in some of the engagement techniques that we've applied over the years. I'll go through some of these quickly, but again, the intent here is not to dive into a super technical analysis of why these save energy and exactly how, but just to highlight why some of these have been successful for our customers. For burner upgrades, in terms of identifying the measure and understanding how this can be applicable to a specific customer, there's a lot that we can see and understand if this is a road we want to go down. So for any of these measures, you want to do your best to not dive into that litany of detailed questions with your head down on a clipboard looking at a checklist. It's really about using your expertise and your intuition to guide the conversation about what those opportunities could be. So for boiler burner upgrades, the goal is a fully modulating burner with O2 trim. We want to be able to make sure that they have a system in place that can load match the heat that they need and minimize the amount going up the stack. So if we know that that's the goal and we're able to ask questions about the age of their burner or have some visibility into how much modulation is going on, that's what can lead us down the path of understanding, is this a measure that we want to talk about more, or do we want to identify that They've got a burner on a 45-year-old boiler that they're planning on retiring and replacing in the next year. Great, here's what you can do for the new equipment. We're not going to focus on this as an actionable item now. For steam traps, this is another really great popular measure, and some simple questions. Do you have a steam trap audit spreadsheet that I can see? And when was the last time you completed that comprehensive audit? And the longer the time since that last audit, the more savings potential there is. And there are published percent savings that you can apply based on the longer they've waited before they've last addressed any of their steam traps. And this is where that data that we showed just a couple slides earlier, if you have that overarching picture of their annual usage, it's pretty easy to quickly give them some numbers around what those returns and what that investment could yield for them. Condensate return, really visible. So if there's water, condensate dumping out onto the floor in the mechanical room, there's an opportunity. Anytime a customer is not returning condensate, that's expensive. Heating water from 55 degrees to 220, it's pretty easy to understand why that takes a lot more energy than heating it from 170 to 220 or higher, depending on their steam pressure. So asking questions about how much makeup water they use, and just observing or asking, is there condensate pouring onto the floor? And it's not that it's a reflection of how poorly they've maintained their system. Water leaks happen, and if their facilities team is just looking at that condensate as just another water leak that they'll get to when they have time, bringing the visibility to them of the actual dollars that are spilling out onto the floor. I've been in walkthroughs and treasure hunts with customers where we've identified a condensate leak, and they've said, yep, it's been like that for a couple of years. We'll get to that when we can. And when we brought visibility as to actually what that was costing them, that small leak, it was put in as a work order and completed within a week of my leaving the facility. So these are great actionable measures that, because of our engagement technique, are actually being completed. Next slide. So here's some pictures from some of the equipment around a facility, mostly in the mechanical room, and this speaks to the pipe and fitting and tank insulation opportunity. These are great paybacks. Again, we need to bring visibility to the actual energy waste that's happening in these spaces for our customers, because every day they walk past these tanks and fittings and condensate receivers that are uninsulated, but they're not looking at it as an opportunity. They're looking at it as, that's the equipment that's been sitting in this room that has been since I started working here. Pipe insulation is a long measure life. It has a great payback. Usually on straight pipe, it's less than 1.5 years or 2 years, depending on the fluid temperature. It's easy to scope and contract. So it's usually a very specific contractor that you don't need a GC to engage with. It's easy to procure, and these are the projects that people are getting done. If it's the easier it is to procure the project, the more likely it is. And when we put those opportunities out in front of them and talk to them about how easy it would be to complete the work, you're going to motivate the change and see those increased measures that are implemented. So a simple IR camera is going to bring visibility to the problem, and if you're able to quantify those energy and cost impacts, this is an easy one for customers to move forward with. Next slide. So these are not arbitrary measures. If you can see this table here, these are not theoretical. These are measures that you'll find in many books and white papers about efficiency, but these are the most common ones that we've documented that are actually implemented when visiting facilities and working with our customers in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic region. So the title of this presentation is Unlocking Opportunities, and I think these are all the opportunities that can easily break the efficiency ice for a customer. They're easy to contract, they have fast paybacks, they're somewhat visible, and the ones that aren't visible, you all as building science professionals are the ones that can help bring visibility to them for your customers. These are all measures that typically can be completed out of an operational budget. They don't require capital requests, and there's a huge wall there between what can be completed under an existing budget or requires a request. The exception could be the burner measure, but that seems to be one that people are willing to move forward on. So I did include it, even though it may require a capital request. And if we add these measures in with the information that we have about a customer, you can start the conversation already knowing the high level potential of savings that customers will see. And when I know that I have just one day or 2 days on site with a customer, and if I know ahead of time that they have a steam system that's more than 20 years old, I'm already running those savings scenarios of what I can present to them in real time based on what I see when I'm there. And this is the relevancy that a treasure hunt style engagement can really bring to customers. Next slide. So if those measures that we just talked about were on the generation side, there's a whole nother subset of measures that we can look at that are on the demand side. So anytime there's an increase in demand, that's going to magnify those inefficiencies that already exist on the generation side. Large complicated systems, again, I'm going to say there's a lot of invisibility there, and I like to focus on the air handling units in a larger built up system and how those are demanding the energy from the central heating and cooling plant, and then focus on the space and how that's demanding energy from the air handler. Looking at an air handler could be interesting, but it isn't going to tell you much about what the potential is going to be for that customer to optimize their energy use. I always go back to load matching. Load matching equals comfort equals efficiency. So we want to use this to get to the low-hanging fruit opportunities and to create that visibility into this big gray box, which is the HVAC world. We can ask some questions. These are usually conversations that I have on site with a customer. And talking about what zones are not meeting set points and where are people uncomfortable and what areas are zones not occupied 24/7. Schedules are simple and they're simply overlooked. I've yet to walk into a facility that didn't have a scheduling opportunity. And most of those schedules can be adjusted in less than 10 minutes if you've got a technician at the table with you. Next slide. So within that demand, I consider all of the distribution. So we've got slides here, we've got pumps, we've got chilled water coils, heating coils, and it's not the fans and the pumps that are inherently inefficient. The efficiency gains come with the communications, and we could spend multiple hours talking about controls and programming, but you don't have to be a controls expert to find opportunities. If you have a basic understanding of the graphical interface and what the customer has visibility into, you can see when pumps and fans are not modulating and when they're not load matching. And I often really break this down in terms of following the communication path. So I like to start in the space and I like to walk through it with the customer because this is tangible and this is valuable for the customer. And when we're walking through that communication path with these individuals who have all of this institutional knowledge about their building, and they get to the point where their answer is either I don't know or nothing in response to my question of what's the control signal for this piece of equipment or this response, then as soon as you hit that I don't know or nothing, you have just identified an opportunity for savings. Because if we can't follow that path of communication of what we're asking our equipment to do, and I keep coming back to that, what are you asking your equipment to do? And if you don't know, then you're not load matching. Next slide. HVAC systems that serve these large commercial, institutional, and a lot of times industrial campuses are complicated, and it can be overwhelming. And this is why so many of those reports and audits that are generated are put on shelves and ignored. And so to ask, if you were gonna, it's overwhelming to think if you were gonna ask all the questions you would need to in order to fully optimize all the energy using components, from the generation to the distribution to the space. And we really want, in this engagement method, to inspire action. We want to focus on those retrofit measures. So a call to action is to develop those programs that equally support customers optimizing what they have and planning for those capital investments in the future. And when you're developing those programs around those market opportunity measures, ensuring that you have the connections in place that will drive market transformation, and creating initiatives that help customers think proactively and plan for those investments and those market opportunities in the future. That's the formula that we're looking for. That's really going to inspire that market transformation. We know that customers don't replace HVAC equipment unless they have to. And all of this equipment lasts a long time. So if you think of it in terms of that, you have one chance every 20 to 40 years to influence a decision for your customers. These measures here on this table, again, these are the ones that we have seen historically that are acted on when we identify them, and that are easy to scope and easy to contract. This is how you're going to get their attention, so that you're going to be at the table and they look to your technical expertise in your program when it's time to make those 20 to 40 year decisions that are really going to impact the big stuff. Next slide. So ventilation is, it really is a demand side component, but it's such a significant contributor to the overall HVAC energy use. I typically call it out on its own, especially knowing from a mechanical engineering standpoint. Those design engineers, they're looking at that ventilation load, and they're designing this as a specific category of load that needs to be satisfied to meet the set points in the buildings. Ventilation it's another gray or tan box sitting on a roof, or it can be a section in a packaged gray or tan box. And again, the goal is to understand what is the customer's ideal strategy and help them understand if they're close to that. It is significant in terms of the energy that it demands to supply the proper ventilation to spaces. And again, it's largely invisible. It's required, and in terms of the measures that we look for around efficiency, they couple pretty similarly to the previous slides measures that we talked about, but adding those measures of energy recovery and making sure that if there is energy recovery, is it actually implemented? I see so many energy recovery wheels that are put in and then they're just left in bypass. So again, there's this thought from the customer side of, I have an ERV section in my air handler, I must be saving energy, but it's making sure that that assumed strategy is that actually what's taking place. Dampers and actuators and controls, again, we don't need to be controls technicians to be able to look quickly and understand if damper actuators are never modulating, or if it makes sense given the occupancy and the outdoor air conditions. Is that outdoor air damper in the position that makes sense that you assumed it would be in? The coupled versus decoupled strategy and the associated controls, that's something I like to just understand and talk through with my customers. They might not even be thinking in terms of whether they have a coupled or decoupled ventilation system in their building, and bringing that awareness and that visibility and increasing that base knowledge of how these systems are impacting the energy use and the comfort and the health of the building. There's a lot of value that we're providing to our customers that isn't quantified in a kWh or an MMBTU savings number. It's in informed operation of a building. And we know that that's going to lead to energy savings, or at least avoidance of energy being wasted down the line. Next slide. So the ventilation energy is significant, and here's just an example of why. This is an example of bin data from ASHRAE Climate Zone 4A. This is bin data that's a typical office operation. So Monday through Friday with some hours on a Saturday, not running 8760. And this is simply illustrating that there are 1,500 hours a year when that outdoor air has a higher energy state than the indoor space set point. So this translates directly into electrical energy needed to meet that sensible and latent load of bringing that air from its outdoor condition down to the space set points. Next slide. And so similarly, in these zones where you have heating and cooling, there's over about 2,200 hours per year when that outdoor air has a lower energy state. So now you're illustrating why that ventilation load has a significant component on thermal energy use. And this really is this is a way to bring some visibility into that ventilation energy that a customer could be using. And I think one of the measures that was called out on a previous slide was a change of use of space. So it's many times we see that there are spaces that are receiving 100% outdoor air because of a change of use, or a building was reconfigured, that space doesn't actually need 100% outdoor air. And if the customer might be thinking, well, that's the equipment that's in place, it doesn't matter, I'll continue to use that because I can, bringing visibility to how expensive conditioning that virgin air 100% as opposed to reusing some of that air you've already paid to condition that's a great slide and a great way to engage your customer in talking about what that ventilation strategy could be. And again, often this is considered retrofit. We're not talking about installing new dedicated outdoor air units with new cooling coils. We're talking about getting a handle on what they've got going on now and how we can optimize that going forward. Next slide. So it's hard to talk about ventilation right now without talking about how this ventilation conversation is going to change. So our conversations about energy and ventilation look very different today than they did 6 months ago. I really wasn't able to use any content from any previous trainings around ventilation without using some asterisks and using a lot of examples of how the importance of understanding the fundamentals and that baseline of how ventilation is used in buildings and how it impacts energy. And then we need to really kind of put that energy piece aside and really help our customers with what they're going to be facing over the next 18 to 24 months in terms of the HVAC systems in their buildings. And the CDC has called out that HVAC is a focus area of making buildings safe to occupy. It's one component, it's not all of it, but we know that there's going to be energy implications. More outdoor air for longer periods of time is going to max out the cooling equipment this summer, and it's going to tax the heating plants this winter. And fan energy is going to increase as we stack up higher MERV filters in our air handlers and add UV lighting banks. We're going to, if those fans are on VFDs, we're not going to see the modulation. We're going to see a lot of fans running at 60 hertz or more to try and make these buildings, quote, safe for occupants going forward to help meet these guidelines. I think that the good news, and I am an optimist, and I think that how we can look at this in terms of our value to our customers is that I bet there are many of you on this call today that are just absolutely primed to be part of the solution for your customers. So having that knowledge of these ventilation systems and the value that I think I'm already being asked to provide to people and to customers and buildings is they're saying, I've never thought about this before. I don't know how close I am to meeting these recommendations, and I don't know what my equipment can do. And so being able to provide that support in terms of helping customers understand what they have and how close they're going to get to these recommendations with the equipment that they have is going to be really valuable. And equipment and designs and specifications are going to look very different going forward than they have in years past in terms of how new buildings are set up to provide air to its occupants. If you're looking for an interesting case study or read, I recommend, if you have a chance, to look at the OPR for the new ASHRAE headquarters building. This is something I looked at probably back in December or January, really before the world started to change. And they were already designing their system with what they considered the new baseline as ventilation to 30% over ASHRAE 62.1 guidelines. And this is the ASHRAE headquarters building. And I think that looking at this OPR and what these building scientists who are determining their own building design were asking for, that's going to be more prevalent of what we're going to see people asking for in the future. Next slide. So in conclusion here, I just want to make sure that we're taking forward the use of data, your experience, high-level conversations, and using all of that to set yourself up to break down the complexities of these mechanical systems and really focus on load matching and the communication path of what that equipment is being asked to do. So do not rely on incentives to be the catalyst for change. We need artful engineering to design the programs that are going to solve tangible problems for building operators. And the approach to designing ventilation strategies is changing quickly, and it's changing dramatically. And stay apprised of the recommendations that are coming out from ASHRAE and the CDC. And building operators will need help understanding how they can get close to those recommendations with the equipment and the controls that they already have. And take the time to build those relationships and make those connections to characterize your customers, because that, in conjunction with your engineering expertise, we believe, and what we've seen from experience, that's what's going to really unlock the next layer of energy savings from HVAC opportunities.
Rachel, thank you. I have to say it's always a pleasure to hear the insights that you've picked up from your direct experience, working with customers in the field, and just the tips and advice that you can share with everybody that's joined us today. That key lesson of, focusing on personalizing your program and your approach to measures, like trying to figure out how to create that opportunity for your customers that really encourage them to take action. It's not the dusty old report that they've had already. It's like thinking things through a little bit more strategically, because obviously, we're all looking to help deliver impact and save energy. And I think, these are challenges that, are just amplified by, as we look for the commercial building sector, going back to work and how to effectively prep those buildings. So hopefully everybody that joined us today found, Rachel's comments and active discussion, of benefit. We do have around 10 minutes available to answer questions. So I'm just going to open up the question box right now. If you've got one that's that you've put in already, I'll see if I can read those out in the manner and the priority which they were put in. So give me one moment. But please, if you have any burning questions that you'd like to ask, please use the question box on the GoToWebinar sidebar to ask questions. So let's have a look. We have one question here. Actually, it's more of a statement. It's a good morning from a fellow VEIC colleague saying, thank you so much for the presentation. They enjoyed it. It's always good to hear that we've got fellow colleagues on the line as well. So I'll leave it a few moments just to see. I know that there's a lot of information that's to digest there. While people are thinking through some of those comments themselves, I think there were some of the questions that I'd been batting around with Rachel and a few of her other colleagues too. One thing that came to mind was that you had actually mentioned that at VEIC you'd performed treasure hunts or Kaizen energy sort of energy search opportunities. Could you give a sense of like what % savings you're identifying in that low to no cost of bucket when you go around facilities?
Good question. Let's see, I know that there are others who have compiled this on a comprehensive basis that I know would be able to give really good numbers on what we've seen divided out by commercial and industrial facilities. I think in those, what we consider those big wins, or those measures that could be paid out of operational budgets and don't require capital requests. I'm drawing on my experience with healthcare facilities and commercial facilities, and I think it's usually in the like 3 to 9% total energy savings range. And Zoe, I don't know if you have someone else on the line that could speak more comprehensively to the range of savings that we see for all of our customers.
Sure. I think, and this is for the benefit of people on the line here too, I've been engaged in some of the treasure hunts, and I know that when we look at the aggregate level, we're typically looking between 5 and 10% of energy savings across both electrical and thermal measures. Obviously, that changes slightly. It can be higher dependent on, the specific customer. Typically, we've seen, in our experience to date, slightly higher savings within hospitals. But again, we typically use 10% as a rule of thumb.
Thanks, Zoe.
Yep. So there's another quick question that came in here that says, is there an estimate on the % increase in energy consumption or costs by ASHRAE due to modification of HVAC operations due to COVID-19 requirements?
There are, and I've seen them published in terms of an increase per square foot. And I would say if you can follow some of those links to the ASHRAE task force, I know that they've tried to quantify that. I think the variance is that it depends on what they were doing before. And there are some facilities that are going to have to make huge improvements, especially if on the unitary equipment side. There's some great information out there in the lower mid-Atlantic states, which have already started to open up some of their big city centers and those big buildings with large built-up air handler units. And I think they were looking at, for their summer operation, with the increase over what they were doing previously, which was a pretty good ventilation strategy, they're looking at a 5 to 8% increase in energy.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think the next question here seems to be a good follow-up to that one, that as we're looking at the recommendations that ASHRAE's put forward for ventilation, are these going to be required or necessitate new equipment, or are these things that could be potentially implemented just using existing equipment?
That's a good question, and it totally depends. And I think that's where folks in our market can provide a ton of value, because again, this is something that customers have not thought about previously. And if I think of customers who have rooftop units, it's going to be getting creative with how we can alter the operation of those outdoor air dampers and maybe control them if they haven't been controlled before. So I think it's going to be using the equipment you have and modifying it to meet some of the requirements for 100% outdoor air, flushing the building and disabling demand control ventilation, so they never modulate down to a lower outdoor air condition. And then there's going to be that crossover point where the building just gets uncomfortable because these systems weren't designed for all of this ventilation air in terms of the capacities of the heating and the cooling coils. So I think that all buildings are going to be able to do better and get close with what they have. I worry about schools with a lot of like unit ventilators and a lot of unitary equipment in terms of how those are going to need to be modified to meet some of these requirements.
Thank you, Rachel. Another quick question that came in here, slightly different topic. Are there savings associated with installing a BAS, so building automation system, during improvement upgrades?
Visibility always leads to savings. So does installing a DDC BAS system equal savings? The existence of it does not equal savings. And I compare that to a VFD. The purchase of a VFD and hanging it on the wall does not actually equal savings. It's what do you do with it? So a VFD or a fully automated BAS and that interface, that gives you the potential and the opportunity for savings, and that's the foundation. So that's going to lead to visibility. It's going to lead to tracking. It's going to give you that starting point to understand what it is you're asking your equipment to do, and that's what leads to savings. So I get a lot of questions about, I have pneumatics, is it going to save energy by going to a DDC and that fully built out BAS interface? And my answer is it absolutely has a potential to if you do it correctly.
Great. And it looks like we just got another question that came in as follow-up to the previous one around how you can essentially use your existing equipment to do compliant with the COVID ventilation strategies. Are there low-cost measures that could help ensure the ventilation flexibility that you were talking about having concerns specifically in schools? What can they do?
Low-cost measures to
ensure ventilation flexibility.
I think it's going to be around, those low-cost measures are going to be the modifications to the existing outdoor air damper controls. So whatever they have in place to bring fresh air into the building. In schools, we think there's a lot of demand control ventilation that's used in auditoriums and gymnasiums, where you could have just a class of kids in there that's 20, or you could have 500 kids in there, and that ventilation is going to react to that. So taking that ventilation controls that are already in place and modifying them so it's not about the number of people occupying that space. So that's when they recommend disabling that demand control ventilation and using that flexibility of that ventilation air in a new way. And that's going to be flushing the building for 2 hours before occupancy, 2 hours after occupancy, and opening those outdoor air dampers to a position that keeps the building still comfortable but can maximize that air regardless of how it's occupied.
Great, thank you. I think that answered that one perfectly. A few comments that came in saying, thank you, VEIC knows their stuff. So just a kudos to you, Rachel, there. We've got a few more moments before we'll do wrap up of today's training. I did want to pose one question, Rachel, that you and I had been batting around, because we recognize there are a lot of individuals on the phone who already have programs in place. And I think one of the things that's important is to kind of consider, how does the approach that we've just gone through today, which is really focusing more on customer engagement, compare to supporting, for example, something like a retro commissioning contract or another programmatic approach?
Yeah, so when I'm talking to my customers and engaging on some of these big win measures, when I only have 1 to 3 days with them, the topic of retro commissioning often comes up. And I think the big difference is that we are identifying, not only are we identifying the measures, but when you do it in this collaborative way that's really relevant to the building owners and operators, you're empowering them to make some of those changes themselves and to be able to scope and contract that work that they're not going to complete in-house. So like a comprehensive steam trap survey or pipe insulation project. When I think about retro commissioning, that's a piece of the pie, and there's a lot of great savings that are going to result from that. That's more about really mining that sequence of operation and optimizing it from a programming standpoint. And some retro commissioning could probably capture some of the stuff that we are recommending. The difference is the scope and the resource investment on the customer end. And unfortunately, I mean, I think there's huge value in commissioning and retro commissioning, but those are some of the reports that I'm handed that have been produced that have never been acted on. So again, that tells me there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of the way that that information is presented to the customer and the way that they're able to digest and implement that.
Great, thank you for providing that clarification. And we had one more question came in, so I think this might be the last one that we have time to respond to, and that's, does equipment wear such as boiler or ventilator have an impact on efficiency? Would improved maintenance planning have a significant impact on energy use?
Yes, absolutely. Maintenance is something that we talk about, and some of the measures that I highlighted were maintenance in nature. So when you think of calibrating sensors or making sure that damper actuators are not lost in their position, those are maintenance items. So if they don't have the visibility or the work order preventative maintenance plan in place to address these things, and they've been avoided for years, that's going to save energy. I think of condensate pouring out on the floor. I mean, to me, that's a maintenance issue, not a big energy efficiency project. So the more that you are interacting with your equipment and keeping it fine-tuned, the better setup you're going to be to make sure that it's load matching and responding to what you're asking that equipment to do.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. And again, I know there's probably many more questions that people are thinking about and would like to have Rachel provide her insights too. We do encourage you to reach out, let us know how we could help. But in closing, I just want to remind everybody, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar, this is the last in the series of 3 free trainings that VEIC offered that focused on refrigeration, residential, and commercial energy saving opportunities. The purpose of these trainings was really to try and help provide an insight to our colleagues, our friends and families, as we like to call you, about how we at VEIC look to build value and provide, the measurable impact that Rachel today and Dave last week and Ali, Ethan, and Nicole the week before look to provide to end user customers. And we focus again, looking at this on the energy efficiency lens, through building electrification lens, transportation electrification, and strategies that support clean and flexible grids. So I know that many of you on the phone, we're already in active conversations with you about how to innovatively rethink your program offerings. A quick reminder to everybody else, we are a vendor neutral and a technology neutral nonprofit organization. So we're really in a unique position to help you. We want to hear from you about what we can do to help you think through some of the challenges that we're facing and that you're facing. As Rachel said, we're looking to fill that gap between, all of the great energy efficiency knowledge that we know that you have and helping to really spur the action and to deliver those results to your customers. So while you heard from just 5 different experts over the last 3 weeks, we are really proud at VEIC to have more than 200 efficiency experts available to be ready and listen and talk with you through your challenges and to help. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we do hope that you will reach out. As I mentioned at the beginning, we do encourage you to fill out the short survey that will be sent via email after this presentation is closed. We want to know what you think so that we can help improve these trainings in the future. But for now, on behalf of VEIC and Rachel, a sincere thank you for your time today. And for those that joined us for all 3, thank you for joining all 3 presentations. We hope that you found them beneficial, enlightening, and we most certainly look forward to staying in touch and hearing from you in the future. Thank you so much.